This three-bean casserole is dumb.
Scooby-Doo bop, 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 bop. I'm so sorry, babe. I hadn't tasted him yet.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Looking forward to, you know. Like,
don't talk about the ingredients. I know. Yeah.
After, it's just a surprise for your mouth.
yeah.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. It's time for another comic book review. Today I'm reviewing Spawn's Universe, #1 from Image Comics. The plus-size issue that's basically loading up and launching this next wave of Spawn titles that we're getting. That's all coming out before the end of the year. All the sales on that look magnificent. And that's all starts with Spawn Universe. This, I believe, is this like the highest selling #1 issue in the 2010s for Image Comics? It's done insane numbers. I believe it went well over 200,000. So Todd McFarlane has another hit on his hands. He is the writer of this. This comes with a main story illustrated by Jim Chung, gorgeous, and 3 backup stories. First, we get Medieval Spawn illustrated by Steven Segovia, looks fantastic. We get She Spawn from Marcio Takara, also looks great. And then finally, Brett Booth brings the heat with Gunslinger Spawn at the very end. And it definitely sets up a lot of what the Spawn universe is going to be doing. If you like Spawn and you've been reading along, this comic is going to be dynamite for you. I'm giving it a 4-star. The art is impeccable. For having 4 artists, it's good to be Todd McFarlane being one of the most influential artists in the industry today. A lot of what he was doing back in the 90s and with Spider-Man and with Spawn itself has really influenced a lot of artists. So people come and flock to him when he needs somebody to work with. And he brought the heat on this one. I don't think the writing is quite as good, but I'll be honest, Todd McFarlane is not my favorite comic book writer. He's got a weird style. It's like a mix of new writing to where it's decompressed, but it's also like a mix of old school writing where it's not just first-person narration. That's what a lot of modern comics narration is first-person narration. No longer thought bubbles, and used to have thought bubbles and narration. Now it's just first-person narration. It's a combination of both. He uses a lot of narration with his kind of more decompressed storytelling. But if you're a fan of Spawn, you're going to love this. It's probably going to be a lot closer to a 5 because the art is fantastic, and you're going to like Todd McFarlane's writing more than me. If you are new to Spawn and you thought Spawn's universe is the ultimate jumping-on point, you can get into this and you'll enjoy it because the visuals are fantastic. But there are going to be elements and characters in here that you have no idea who they are. Unless you've been reading the comic book for like 20 years. Or maybe if you started maybe in the build up to 300, they did address a lot of these characters and some of the hanging plot points that have been going on for the last few decades on the ramp up to that. And then in there, we got a lot of information regarding on characters, obviously in 300 and 301. But if this is your first introduction in Spawn, you will be a little bit lost, but Todd does a perfectly fine job of making it entertaining. You're not going to be so lost that it's unenjoyable, in my opinion. So this is definitely a highly recommend. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy it and probably already have now that, it's already Friday. So I imagine most people have already read that. Let's get right into it. I'm not going to get way into the weeds on this because it is a thick comic book. I'll talk about the 2 main plot points that we get in the main story and then briefly cover the last 3 stories, which are mostly just teasers, if I'm being completely honest. In the main story, we meet this big new villain. His name is the Disruptor, and Jim Chung makes him look very, very intimidating. Wonderful addition to the Spawn family as far as a new villain. Before this, Spawn is essentially dispatched of Omega Spawn on Omega Island, but there's still readings happening on the island, so he decides to charge up Cygor, the cybernetic gorilla, and take him to the island to go find out what's happening. He ends up running into the Disruptor. It does not go well. They are defeated quite easily, and we find out that the Disruptor has replaced Omega Spawn as the new villain. He was sort of an underling to that character, and he was biding his time and is taking a different approach to his negotiations with Spawn and the things that are happening, the war between heaven and hell going on Earth. We do know that Spawn has closed down the gateways, so anything from heaven or hell cannot get out of Earth, and anything from heaven or hell cannot get into Earth. So everyone's trapped at the moment, and they really wanted to open up the gateways. But Spawn's not going to do that, of course. After that, Spawn is interrogated. He's kind of locked up and tortured a bit. He's there with Gunslinger Spawn. Turns out these two do not really trust each other, probably don't like each other. And we also get Cagliostro. This character has been a long time. I remember when I first started reading Spawn, I thought he was like a protagonist helper. Turns out he's more of an antagonist. I bet a lot of people, when they read Spawn for the first time, think that he's a good guy. And then you find out that's not really the case. But they're all being held by the disruptor on this island. They want some information, and it turns out Cagliostro wants to give them some information, but Spawn and Gunslinger Spawn do not like this man, and they are having none of it. So he does get freed, and I will talk about the Cagliostro stuff after this, because it's probably the more interesting part of the story, rather than these big reveals about this new villain and what's happening on Omega Island. Eventually, Spawn and Gunslinger Spawn are able to outwit their captors. They escape from the bonds, and they have a nice shootout. They start blowing people away. They jump in the shadows, and it appears that they have made a successful escape. This was all very good. It's a lot of fun. Like I said, it's classic Todd McFarlane storytelling. If you like the way Todd McFarlane writes comics, you're really going to enjoy this. The more interesting plot kind of goes throughout. It starts in the beginning. It also happens when they are in the interrogation, when they're all locked up together. And then it also is the very last image, I believe, of this first story from Jim Chung. And I cannot overstate how good this art looks. It just looks badass. But we see Cagliostro. He's being threatened by some of the Disruptor's henchmen who were working for Omega Spawn before. Cagliostro's cat decides that he's going to jump into the battle. And this a-hole shoots the cat in the face, killing it, and it turns out that he knows that whatever it is that keeps Cagliostro alive has been implanted in the cat, and that is where he's been keeping it this whole time, and he digs it out of the cat. He takes him back to be interrogated. Cagliostro is trying to show Spawn and Gunslinger Spawn this scar that he wants to show him. He needs to give them information. They aren't hearing it. He does this weird thing where he screams. I'm not sure exactly what that meant. I don't know if that calls back to some things that Cagliostro has done in the past, but I thought it was odd that he was able to scream, and they like removed him from his shackles, and they end up kicking him into this enormous pit, very, very reminiscent of the movie 300. And when he's down there, and before this happened, I forgot about this. When he frees himself, he takes a bullet out of Gunslinger Spawn's off his body and puts it into his pocket. Because I guess he needs something that a Spawn has touched, or it belongs to them. And when he gets kicked into this pit, he starts doing something with like a rock, and he's got this bullet, and he starts like shaving his head or something. The next thing you know, this Plague Spawn guy shows up, and we get this really crazy reveal. It appears Cagliostro is no more by the end of this comic book, or at least actually by the middle of it, because it's the end of the very first story. And he is a new character called Sin, and you see him flying out of the ocean at the end. A lot of very interesting stuff. This right here, obviously, is going to be picked up in the main Spawn or the King Spawn. Maybe this is leading to the King Spawn story arc. But it's going to be probably both, the mainline Spawn and King Spawn. So if you are interested in this, that's where you're going to have to pick up those story elements, I imagine. The next thing we get is Medieval Spawn. This is from Steven Segovia, who's been illustrating the Hellion series for Marvel Comics for quite some time, one of the better illustrated series at Marvel Comics. He brings the heat once again in this Medieval Spawn story. And these backup stories, these 3 backup stories, these are like teasers about who these characters are and likely where we're picking up their plots. And in this one, there's this wizard, I think his name is Tyrus. He's on top of this enormous dragon, and he has slayed all of Medieval Spawn's like army. There's an entire road of blood leading to them for Medieval Spawn, and they get into a conflict. And then I think his name is Tyrus. I'm pretty certain that's his name. He shoots Medieval Spawn with like a bolt of lightning, and this young man wakes up from his sleep. His name is Mark Rosen. It's clear to me that he and the Medieval Spawn symbiote are somehow bonded, and eventually he will be Medieval Spawn in our current times. He's going to be a member, I'm just guessing here, of the Scorched. Speaking of the Scorched, I think the character that's going to be the lead, and this is illustrated by Marcio Takara, is going to be She-Spawn. That's the feeling that I get. with Medieval Spawn, essentially that teaser is he's becoming, he's starting to see where he came from and what Medieval Spawn is. She Spawn in her journey is in a completely different place. She's accepted the fact that she is a Hellspawn. And in order to be able to do what she's got to do, she has to leave everything she ever cared about behind, including her daughter. It turns out her daughter has been told that Jessica is her aunt, not her mother. And Jessica Priest goes to visit a park where she sees her actual mother, who's been taking care of her daughter that is unaware that she is her mom, and she wants to talk to her. Her mother gives her a verbal dressing down of biblical proportions. She gets to give her one final hug as she has basically come to grips with the fact that she's a Hellspawn. She's going into war, and she's never coming back. Really awesome image to end us off with from Marcio Takara, where she's got all these guns and everything, but she's ready for battle. So we have one character that I believe will be the leader of the Scorch, who's ready to go into battle with guns blazing. We got Mark Rosen, who's going to become Medieval Spawn, who doesn't even know his place in all these things, that's about to be imbued with the power. The last teaser we get is from Brett Booth. I think he's going to be the primary artist on the Gunslinger Spawn series, so that is great. He does a wonderful job. And this kind of sets up that series. I don't think this character will be part of the Scorch. I do think Gunslinger Spawn, that's with Spawn in the very beginning story, that version of him will be. But this version here, this is a revenge story. He wakes up, Gunslinger Spawn is laying down. He's got arrows in his chest. We get some close-ups. He's been decapitated. He's missing a face, and a lot of bad things have happened to him. You can see that his body has been weathered. It's been deteriorating as he has been dead for at least a year. It turns out he was with a group of people. I believe it said half a dozen that he was escorting through, and they were murdered in cold blood, and his face was skinned off alive. Like, he was skinned alive, and they cut his face off. There's a whole pile of faces. He goes and finds it. He puts it back on, and Gunslinger Spawn is ready to go exact some revenge. Of all the series that we've got coming up, King Spawn, which I imagine is going to be coming out of that first story somehow. I'm not sure exactly how. The Scorch, which I think will have that version of Gunslinger Spawn, She Spawn, and at least Medieval Spawn. And then Gunslinger Spawn being the third one. This is the one I'm most excited about. A good old-fashioned revenge story illustrated by Brett Booth. Are you kidding me? This thing looks amazing. Very well illustrated. In my opinion, of the backup stories, this was the most engaging and engrossing, and definitely pulls you right in. And that is my review of Spawn's Universe #1. 4-star comic. Definitely recommend this. 318 issues in the making. We're finally getting a fully fleshed out Spawn universe. Lots of new Spawn have been introduced leading up to and after issue 300. Obviously, Todd McFarlane has been working this for quite some time. It's finally happening, folks. Spawn's Universe came this week, and it looks like he's fleshing out and getting ready, laying the groundwork for all these new Spawn series coming up. Which one are you guys most excited for? Are you more excited for King Spawn, Gunslinger Spawn, or the Scorched? Me personally, I'm going to be getting Gunslinger Spawn no matter what. That thing is going to be awesome. Let me know what you guys thought about Spawn's Universe. Did you enjoy it more than me? I imagine a lot of you did. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.